February 27th, 1999. Greenpoint, Brooklyn. Tony Sirico walked onto the set of The Sopranos wearing a tracksuit and gold chains, ready to play Paulie Walnuts. But here's what most people don't know. Sirico wasn't acting. He'd lived this life. 28 arrests, 7 years in prison, bullet wounds, armed robbery, extortion. This wasn't a character he studied. This was a character he survived.
Did you ever go to jail?
Yeah,
How many times?
a few times.
This wasn't some method actor doing research. Tony Sirico was the real thing. A Brooklyn street kid who ran with the Colombo crime family, got shot, went to war, and somehow lived long enough to turn it all into television gold. He didn't pretend to be a wise guy. He was one. This is the story of how a legitimate mobster became one of television's most iconic characters. From stick-ups in Bensonhurst to solitary confinement in Sing Sing, from rubbing shoulders with actual mob bosses to making millions playing one on HBO, this is Tony Sirico's double life. But here's the part that doesn't make sense. Sirico refused to play rats. He refused to play cops. Even as an actor making millions, he lived by the code. And the mob guys who watched The Sopranos, they loved him for it, because Tony Sirico never forgot where he came from. Gennaro Anthony Sirico Jr. was born July 29, 1942, in Brooklyn, Bensonhurst, Italian neighborhood, working-class families. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone and nobody talked to cops. His father worked construction. His mother raised 5 kids in a cramped apartment. Money was tight. Opportunity was limited. The streets offered another option. By age 7, Tony was running errands for local wiseguys. Not big stuff. Delivering packages. Watching cars. The mobsters would flip him $1. To a kid from Bensonhurst, these guys looked like kings. They wore suits. They drove Cadillacs. They commanded respect. Tony wanted that life. At 13, he dropped out of school. Why sit in a classroom when the real education was happening on the corner? He started hanging around social clubs in Brooklyn, places where connected guys played cards, ran numbers, discussed business. Tony watched. He learned. He understood the hierarchy, and he wanted in. His first arrest came at age 19, 61, assault and robbery. He'd stuck up a nightclub in Manhattan with 2 friends, got caught, did a few months. When he got out, he didn't stop. He escalated, because in that world, you prove yourself through action. You show you're willing to take risks. You demonstrate you won't break. Through the 60s, Tony Sirico became a familiar face in Brooklyn's criminal underworld. He ran with crews connected to the Colombo family. Not a made guy himself, he wasn't Italian enough on both sides, but an associate, a guy who could be trusted with certain work, stick-ups, mostly, armed robbery, high-risk, high-reward jobs that required nerve and silence. He dressed the part perfectly, slicked back hair, pinky rings, silk shirts unbuttoned just enough. He walked with a swagger that said, "Don't mess with me," and he meant it. Tony Sirico wasn't playing tough guy, he was a tough guy. The kind of guy who'd pistol whip someone over a perceived disrespect. His reputation grew. By the late 60s, he was known as a serious earner and a guy who didn't back down. Other criminals respected him, feared him a little too, because Tony had something dangerous. A willingness to go further than necessary, a temper that could flip from charming to violent in seconds. That made him valuable. It also made him a target. Arrest number 5 came in 66, felony weapons possession. He'd been caught with an unlicensed .38 revolver, did 8 months. Arrest number 9 came in 68. Extortion, someone complained. Case got dropped. Witnesses changed their stories. That's how it worked. You intimidate the right people, charges disappear. But arrest number 12 changed everything. December 1971, a robbery in Brooklyn went bad. Tony and 3 associates hit a warehouse. Someone called the cops. Shots fired. Tony took 2 bullets. One grazed his leg. Another lodged near his spine. He survived. got arrested at the hospital, faced 20 years. Here's where Tony Sirico made the calculation that would define his next chapter. He was 29, looking at serious time. He could cooperate, maybe cut a deal. Or he could stand up, take his sentence, and maintain his reputation on the street. He chose the second option: no cooperation, no testimony. He pled guilty, got 4 years, went to Sing Sing. Prison in the 70s wasn't rehabilitation, it was survival. Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York. Maximum security, violent, overcrowded, guards who didn't care. Inmates who settled disputes with shanks. Tony did his time hard. Solitary confinement, multiple times for fighting. He wasn't the kind of guy who backed down just because he was locked up. But something happened during those 4 years, something nobody expected. Tony Sirico started going to the prison theater program, an acting class run by volunteers. He'd never considered performing before. But in prison, you take what distractions you can get. And Tony discovered something. He was good at it. He could command a room. He had natural timing. And when he played tough guys, street guys, wise guys, it didn't feel like acting. It felt like Tuesday. The other inmates watched him perform and saw someone they recognized, someone real. The acting coach saw potential, raw, unpolished, dangerous potential. When Tony got out in 75, he was 33 years old. Most guys coming out of a 4-year stretch go right back to the life. It's what they know. It's where they're comfortable. Tony thought about it differently. He'd seen guys die young. He'd seen guys get life sentences. He'd taken bullets. Maybe there was another way to use his skills. He started showing up to auditions in New York, small theater productions, off-Broadway stuff. Directors would take one look at him and know exactly what he was, a real Brooklyn street guy. No acting required. He got cast as thugs, criminals, mob enforcers, because that's what he'd been. The transition wasn't dramatic. He was still playing himself, just with cameras around. His first real role came in 77, a small part in an indie film called Crazy Joe, about Joey Gallo. Tony played a mob soldier, barely any lines. But he looked right, moved right, talked right, because he'd lived in that world for 15 years. Directors started remembering him. Through the late 70s and early 80s, Tony Sirico worked steadily, always small parts, always criminals. He appeared in Fingers in 78, Defiance in 79. He wasn't getting rich, but he was staying out of prison. That counted for something. But the streets kept calling. Old friends, old habits. Between acting jobs, Tony slipped back into familiar patterns. Arrest number 16. Arrest number 20. Disorderly conduct. Assault. Nothing major enough to send him back for serious time, but enough to keep him in the system. He was living a double life. Actor by day, street guy by night. It couldn't last. 1989. Tony got arrested for the 28th and final time. The details aren't public, but sources suggest it involved a nightclub dispute in Brooklyn. Charges were eventually dropped. But Tony was 47 years old. He'd been arrested 28 times. He'd done serious prison time. His luck was running out. He made a decision. No more. He was done with the street life. Acting only. Legitimate work. No going back. That commitment changed his trajectory. Through the 90s, Tony Sirico became a familiar face in mob movies. He appeared in Goodfellas in 90. Small role, uncredited. But he was there. Working with Martin Scorsese. Standing alongside Ray Liotta and Robert De Niro. Watching real mob history get turned into cinema. He kept grinding. Mob movies loved him because he brought authenticity. He didn't have to fake the accent. He didn't have to learn the slang. He'd grown up speaking like that. When he said, "Forget about it," it sounded exactly right, because he'd been saying it since 1950. Gotti in 96. He played a Gambino soldier, Bullets over Broadway in 94, working with Woody Allen. Mickey Blue Eyes in 99. Always the same type. Brooklyn tough guys. Wise guys, enforcers. But Tony didn't complain. He understood the game. You get typecast as what you are. And what he was a former mobster who could act. Then came the call that changed everything. 1998. HBO was developing a new show about the New Jersey mob, a drama series, big budget, serious actors. They needed someone to play Paulie Walnuts, a mid-level soldier in the Soprano crew, paranoid, violent, loyal, superstitious. The casting director had seen Tony's work. They wanted him to audition. Tony read the script and saw himself. Paulie Walnuts wasn't a stretch. The character was a Brooklyn guy who'd spent his whole life in the mob, never married, no kids, lived with his mother, obsessed with respect and loyalty, prone to violence when disrespected. Tony Sirico had known dozens of guys exactly like this. He'd been one of them. But Tony had conditions. He told David Chase, the show's creator, he'd take the role under one circumstance. Paulie could never be a rat, never cooperate with law enforcement, never break the code, even if the story called for it, even if it made dramatic sense. Tony Sirico refused to play a character who violated omerta, not even for HBO money. David Chase agreed. And that decision defined Paulie Walnuts for 6 seasons. While other characters on The Sopranos flipped, cooperated, wore wires, Paulie remained loyal, dangerously loyal, stupidly loyal sometimes, but absolutely, completely loyal, because Tony Sirico wouldn't have it any other way. The Sopranos premiered January 10th, 1999. It became a cultural phenomenon. Critics praised it, audiences obsessed over it. And Paulie Walnuts became one of the show's most beloved characters. Not because he was likable, he wasn't. Paulie was petty, paranoid, occasionally cruel, but he was real. Every mannerism, every expression, every word felt authentic, because it was. Tony brought details from his actual life into the character, the way Paulie slicked his hair, the tracksuits, the gold jewelry, the superstitions. Tony had known old-school wise guys who wouldn't walk under ladders, who crossed themselves constantly, who believed in curses. He'd lived with guys like that in prison. He built Paulie from memory. And the wise guys watching, they loved it. According to multiple sources, actual mobsters watched The Sopranos religiously, and they respected Tony Sirico, because they knew he wasn't faking it. They knew he'd done time. They knew he understood the life. In their world, that mattered. Michael Imperioli, who played Christopher Moltisanti, said Tony would tell stories between takes, real stories, about stick-ups he'd pulled, guys he'd known who got killed, time he'd done in Sing Sing. The other actors listened like students, because Tony Sirico was their connection to the world they were pretending to inhabit. One story became famous among the cast. Tony described getting shot in '71. The warehouse robbery, the bullets. He said when the first one hit him, he didn't feel pain immediately. Just impact, like getting punched hard. The second bullet, the one near his spine, that one hurt. He collapsed, thought he might die, arrested from a hospital bed. Tony told this story casually, like describing a traffic jam, because in his world, getting shot was an occupational hazard. The Sopranos ran for 6 seasons, 86 episodes. Tony Sirico appeared in 73 of them. Paulie Walnuts became iconic, quotable, memorable. The hair, the swagger, the paranoia. Fans dressed as Paulie for Halloween, quoted his lines, bought merchandise. Tony had become famous playing a version of his younger self, but he never forgot the cost. In interviews, Tony was clear. He didn't glorify mob life. He'd lived it. He knew what it really was. Prison, violence, betrayal, death. The Sopranos showed that. It wasn't a celebration. It was an examination. And Tony's performance grounded it in reality. He brought specific details that made Paulie feel lived in, the way Paulie checked his reflection constantly. Tony had known vain wise guys like that, guys who cared deeply about appearance because image was power. The way Paulie held grudges over tiny slights, Tony had seen that too. In that world, Respect is currency. You let one disrespect slide, others pile on. Paulie's relationship with his mother was pulled from Tony's life. Tony had been close to his mother, very close. Even during his criminal years, he'd visit her regularly, bring her money, make sure she was okay. That loyalty, that devotion, despite being a violent criminal, that contradiction was very real. Tony understood it. He put it into Paulie. The show ended in 2007. By then, Tony Sirico was 65. He'd spent decades acting, but he'd spent his youth as a legitimate criminal. 28 arrests, 7 years cumulative prison time, bullet wounds, violence. He'd survived an era when most guys like him ended up dead or doing life. After The Sopranos, Tony kept working. He appeared in movies, did voice work. He played Vinny in Family Guy. He did commercials. He stayed visible. But Paulie Walnuts was his legacy. The role that defined him, the character that millions associated with his face. Real mobsters continued to respect him. There are accounts of Tony being approached in restaurants by guys from the old neighborhood. They'd shake his hand, tell him he got it right. That meant something to Tony, because he hadn't betrayed the culture. He'd represented it accurately, without snitching, without breaking code. In later interviews, Tony spoke about his criminal past with honesty. He didn't brag. He didn't minimize. He said he'd done bad things, hurt people, made terrible choices. But he also said acting saved his life. If he hadn't found that prison theater program in Sing Sing, he'd probably be dead or doing life somewhere. Acting gave him an exit ramp from a highway that only ends two ways. He talked about guys he'd known who didn't make it out, friends who got killed in mob disputes, associates who died in prison, guys who got life sentences for murders committed when they were 20. Tony Sirico easily could have been one of them. The fact that he wasn't, that he survived and thrived, was partly luck and partly choice. James Gandolfini, who played Tony Soprano, spoke about Sirico with admiration. He said Tony brought a danger to set that was valuable, not threatening, just real. You knew you were working with someone who'd actually lived this life. That kept everyone honest, kept the performances from becoming cartoonish. Tony Sirico died July 8, 2022. He was 79 years old. The tributes poured in immediately. Co-stars, directors, fans, everyone remembered Paulie Walnuts.